Okay, so yes, thank you. Okay, so as before, there will be multiple choice questions that are taken from the reading. And then there will be a lab portion that might not be the same distribution of points. I may give more points to the lab session this time. I feel like it was worth enough last time. I only 6 points out of 20. So I may make it worth 8 points instead of 6. It won't be as many as 10. There will be some questions that are new from the reading that we've done in the second half of the semester, which is Chapter 5 and Chapter 6. There may be some from the first half of the semester as well. The questions that I put on from the first half of the semester, you can be sure that they will be the same questions that were on the midterm exam or something very close to those. Okay, so it is definitely worth going back and reviewing the midterm exam, doing a redux of it, figured out which ones you got wrong, make sure that you can answer them correctly this time, because there may be as many as 4 or 5 questions that are like I said, either taken directly from the midterm exam or something so close that, if you understand the questions that were on the test, then you won't have any problem with these either. So do let that be part of your preparation. So there will be some times where, like on the midterm, I give you a little bit of SQL code to look at and tell me what's going on. So for instance, I might do something like, let's try this again. So if I show you like an insert statement, insert into, I don't know, invoices, and then give you a column list. I don't know what I would ask for, but I might do something like this, and then, except of course they would be the actual ones, and then values, and then give you a values list here, like value 1, value 2, like so. So I might show you some code like this and ask you what's wrong with it. What kind of error message is this going to throw? Why will this query not work? Does anybody have an answer for me from the class? Let me pop over here real quick. Okay, Fred, what do you think? What's wrong with this right here? Do you have an idea?
You don't have 3 values.
That's it exactly. The number of columns in the column definition does not match the number of values. So that would be the correct answer to this one. So you guys know it's multiple choice, so I'll ask like, what's wrong with this? And I'll give you like 3 possibilities, 4 possibilities, and you just want to read through and look for something that says something like the items in the column list don't match the number of items in the values list, that sort of thing. If I give you something like this, insert into, what was the example from the chapter? I think it was invoices copy that we made a copy of at the beginning of the chapter 5 stuff, where we created a table, like a test table as a copy of another table. So we did like a select all from invoices to make the, and then we did a partial copy, right, where by including a where condition. So where like terms ID equals 1. That might have been the exact table that we did in chapter 5. I'm not sure. So if I show you something like this, then be able to describe what this is doing. So we know that this is creating a test table from another table, but what else is happening? Like, what is the where clause doing in this? Anybody have an idea?
Specifying.
Who was that?
It's specifying like where you're going to insert it.
No, it doesn't specify where you're going to insert. Remember, we're creating a brand new table here. Okay, who else? Edwin, do you have an idea for me? Do you have to tell me that every single time? Sorry, Windows.
Edwin, are you there?
All right.
Yeah,
Chris.
I'm here. One sec. I'm driving and looking at the same time.
Oh, you're driving. Okay, so let me don't drive and look at code. Okay, Chris, what do you think?
Say that again. Hello.
Are you seeing the code that I'm presenting in
Yes. Yep.
MySQL
Yep.
Workbench? So I'm asking what this current thing is doing here, this code block right here. Any idea?
It selects the entries where the terms ID are equal to 1? Or...
Yeah, it does select from invoices where terms ID equals 1 and does what with them?
Oh, it inserts them into the invoices copy.
Okay. So yeah, that's more or less what's happening here. We're creating a test. It actually, I was saying we're creating a test table. It actually doesn't have the create part of the statement here, I'm now realizing. But yeah, it's inserting into invoices copy all the rows from invoices where terms ID equals 1. That's what it's doing. So it's not saying anything about the new table, the invoices copy table. It's setting a condition on which rows are retrieved from the original invoices table. And to make that clear, hopefully it'll make sense if we just get rid of this first line here or comment it out or something. We know what this one means, right? Select all from invoices where terms ID equals 1. That's what that does. It selects all the rows from invoices, but only those where terms ID column has a value of 1. Okay, I think I'm going to have to reword that question. When you do create a new table, so let's say, no, I'll go ahead and leave that one. So let's say we do like create invoices copy as select all from invoices. Who can tell me whether the primary key and foreign key information from invoices is going to be copied over to the new table? Alfredo, what do you think?
I'm sorry, could you repeat the question again?
So if I'm creating a test table here from invoices, right, and calling the new table invoices copy, will the new table have the primary key and foreign key information that invoices does?
I don't think I know that.
Okay, anybody else? Okay, there's another question I may have to rethink, but when you create a table from another table, we went through this in class, this was the in-class demo, the new table does not have primary key, foreign key, and auto-incrementing information in it. So you may think you've created an exact duplicate of the old table, but you haven't. All right, well, this is going well. Let's say we've got a table inspector that looks like this. Let's say I've got something called team ID and another column called team name and another column called team rank. presumably showing how they're doing in relation to other teams. And the team ID is going to be an integer. It's not allowed to be null. And it's an auto increment. Team rank is just a varchar 50. We've come across that one before. And the team rank is another integer, another not null, and has a default value of 0. Okay, so this is our table. It doesn't matter for now. Well, okay, let's call it teams table. Okay, that's the name of the table here. So what happens if I do an assert statement and I give it all default values? Let's say it doesn't yet have any entries, so there's nothing in this table at all. There's no rows, there's no ID equals 1, let alone anything else. And so I've got this insert into teams values default, default, default. Does anyone have an answer for what values are going to be put into the first row on this table?
0, 50, 0.
Good guess. And the third one is correct. This one will enter, sorry. So the third one will be 0. And the reason why is we're putting the default here, and it tells you what the default is in the table inspector, right? The third one is an integer. It's not allowed to be null, so it can't be any like null value. But if I don't enter something, it's going to insert a default value of 0. So yes, that one will be 0. Now you guys are a bunch of programmers, so I could see why you would think that the auto increment would start on 0, because that's what we do in programming, right? But as far as databases go, at least as far as the MySQL server goes, when you're doing an auto increment, they set the initial value not to 0 but to 1. It starts on 1 and proceeds from there. If you guys have been coding in C-based languages for a while, that seems completely alien to you, I know. But the rest of the world would like to see 1 at the beginning instead of 0. Now, who has an idea what happens in that middle column?
Well, it's a varchar, so it's going to be a character of some kind.
Yeah,
Maybe an A.
You'd expect it to be a string, right? Or some kind of text.
Yeah.
Now, keep in mind on
At
this
least
one,
one, from anywhere from 1 letter to 50.
yeah, and that's, if you were entering something, if you're actually hard coding something in, then it would expect you, actually that would be here, you would expect to see something text or string, right? It would be asking for you to enter something like that. But when I'm putting default here, keep in mind, so this one says default 0, so we know what's going to happen with that one. This one says auto increment, so we know default is there, but this one doesn't specify a default, does it? It also doesn't say not null.
Would that bring up an error?
It won't bring up an error, no. This first column is specified that it cannot be null. This column, the third one, is specified that it cannot be null, but the middle one does not say that. And
So
that
it would come
means
up null.
That's right. The default value in here, if you don't enter something, is going to be null. Exactly.
Pulled a fast one. Had us tripped out by the first and third.
Yeah, this stuff has come up both in class and in the reading. So the stuff to do with the table inspector. So let's see here. Let's do one more with this. Let's say we do insert into teams, And then this time we're going to give it a column list, and we're just going to put one column here. We want team name. So it's going to be inserting into the middle. And then, just like we were saying, it wants it to be a string or variable character, right? So we'll do values. And then, I don't know, what's your favorite team? I'm going to go with Giants. Mismatch quote, fix it. Let me zoom out a bit so you guys can see it here. So here's the teams table. Remember we were just talking about these columns definitions. And this time, instead of doing insert into teams values default, 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 we're just grabbing a single column here and telling it to put Giants in there. So what gets entered into those three columns? All right, folks, we just did this. What goes into team ID if we don't put in a value for it?
No.
Nope.
1.
1. Yeah, except in this case, we may, let's say we already have put this default, default, default in. So the next one's going to be, what auto increments after 1?
2.
Oh, this is going well. Okay, so we know what goes into the second value, right? What's that going to be?
Giants.
Good.
Giants.
What goes into the third one?
0.
0. Good. Okay, now you guys are getting it. So let's go ahead and say this exact thing is going to be on the test. Okay? Or something that's so darn close to it as to make no difference. Okay, I will give you a teams table, and I will give it this definition here. I will give it this exact structure, and I will ask you a couple of questions about what happens if you insert these and what happens if you insert these. Okay, it's going to be something pretty much just like this. Anybody want to take a screenshot? Well, it's on the recording anyway. Because that's kind of an important one to know. I mean, you might think, well, this is kind of next semester stuff, right? Well, it kind of isn't, because this has to do with what happens when you insert values into a table, which is one of the chapters that we did, right? It's a basic CRED operation. Okay, so the ordering of the clauses in a select statement. So I already put these up before when we were doing the demo on one of the two chapters, chapter 5 or chapter 6. These are good ones to know. I think there was a question about this on the midterm too, except in this case it's going to be the same question, except it's going to be extended a little bit because we've got the group by and having to be ordered to it. So I think in the midterm it gave you 4, and it was select and then from and then where and then order by, right? So let me go ahead and put those down. Select from, select the columns, right? And then from, then whatever table, and then where you put a condition on, and then order by. I mean, there's also limit, but I don't think I put that on there because limit is just such a gimme. So actually, I was saying that order by is always at the end, but actually limit is after that. I wasn't thinking of that. So this is 4. I'm going to tack on a couple of new ones to go in here. So if you've got a summary query, then group by happens right after the where, if there is a where, and then having goes after that, but before order by. I'm not going to include like the with rollup or any of that stuff. Just these 6 items, these 6 clauses, know what order those are supposed to go in, which is this order. Okay, let's see. Do I want to put that one in? No, I'm going to have to reduce the number of questions. Basically, what this means is that it just means there will be fewer of the multiple choice questions, and then the lab portion will be worth more points. So there may be as few as 10 points now on the multiple choice stuff, and then 10 points on the lab test instead of 6 points as there was on the midterm. Let me go ahead and put at least one query on here for you and see what you guys think of this. If I do a select and then give you a couple of columns here, like vendor ID, and then another column that has some kind of aggregate function in it, right? This is kind of what chapter 6 is all about. I'll put our old friend in here, the ones that you guys are probably hoping you never see again. Invoice total minus payment total minus credit total. Let's go ahead and say this expression is going to show up on the exam somewhere.
The moment you put in that minus, I knew exactly what you were doing.
Yeah,
How
right.
dare you?
Yeah, you guys have done this like I don't know how many dozens of times by now. Okay, you should be able to code this expression in your sleep. That's probably not the best choice because count is a different kind of function. But as I think what we did, we called it balance due, right? Balance due. And let's see, which one am I doing here? Yeah, okay. So from invoices, group by vendor ID, having balance due, this guy is greater than 0. What is this query doing? I guess I better put that in a comment so it's clear. Does anybody have a description for what this is doing? First of all, what kind of query is it? I mean, I know it's a select query, but is there something more specific than that? Something that maybe one of our chapters was about? All right, folks, what's the name of chapter 6?
It was summary, right?
Summary queries. This is a summary query. It's a big subject. It's one of the 2 things that we've done with the entire second half of this term. Okay, this is a summary query. Any idea, like anyone can explain in English what this query is doing?
It is pulling the sum with the balance due, grouping it by vendor ID, and the halving will be limiting that by the balance dues that are greater than 0.
Okay, so yeah, that's a good start. I feel like you're kind of reading down through the queries, or rather the clauses, and that's exactly the way to start when you're trying to figure out what something does. If a non-coder came to you with this and said, can you please explain to me what the heck is going on here and treat me like I've never done a piece of coding in my life, which I haven't, what would you say to them? And I would say this is returning vendors that have unpaid balances and telling us how much they owe. The ones that have unpaid balances is this guy right here. Having balance due is greater than 0. You know, invoice total minus payment total minus credit total is whatever the vendors have been charged that they haven't paid yet, right? Anything that's above 0. And where it's a bit above 0, return only those and then group by the vendor ID. So it's going to show us, in fact, let's go ahead and do it right now. Let's do this exact thing here. I'm going to make sure I'm using AP, which I'm pretty sure I am, but still. Let's see. There we go. And I did select vendor ID. And then we did a sum, right, of invoice total minus payment total minus credit total, our old friend, as balance due. You guys have definitely seen this before. From invoices, group by vendor ID, having a balance due is greater than 0. Okay, so it's a summary query, which means it's not returning the full table of invoices, right? Give me 7 rows, and instead of like 122 or 114 or whatever that table in total is, it's giving me each vendor ID and the amount that they still owe if that amount is more than 0. If I don't have this last bit in here, if I don't have having balance due greater than 0, then I get more rows, and some of them the balance due is 0. But with that having clause in there, specifying a condition, only the ones that are greater than 0, we're going to put in there. These are the deadbeats who haven't paid us yet, and we still need to send a collector after them to break some kneecaps, right? So I think it's fair game to take something like this, which is absolutely like one of the simpler examples from Chapter 6, or something very close to something that's in Chapter 6, and just asking, hey, what does this do? And it's going to be a little bit easier because it'll be a multiple choice. And so if I give you a multiple choice, and one of the answers is the total unpaid balance due for each vendor ID, and the other ones say something different, then maybe you stand a better chance at that. But yeah, try to do that. When you're looking through these, take some of the simpler examples, and maybe like the first 3, in the perspective for Chapter 5 and Chapter 6, and see if you can just explain in English what those queries are doing. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and stop there. I think you guys have had enough, but I do need to show you one more thing, which is all we're going to have time for tonight, which is the increasingly important lab portion of the exam. Okay, and let me show you exactly what I'm going to want on there, or something very close. So I'm going to be giving you, again, I will give you a database with some tables in it for you to download and open up in MySQL Workbench and install, create the databases and so on, run that code. You guys know how to do that. Everybody managed that in the midterm exam, so I don't have any questions about you guys being able to do it for the final. Now, it's going to be something pretty similar to the musical instruments database. It's not going to be quite the same. It'll be called something different. It'll look like it has some of the same tables in it. It's going to have a Baroque orchestra table. It's going to have a classical orchestra table. But that doesn't mean that they're going to be the same tables. They're going to have similar information, but it's not going to be quite the same. Instead of musical timbres here, which I think the word timbres might have been confusing to non-musicians, but I didn't think of, I'll call it something else. It'll be something very similar to that, though. So in order to prep you for what I'll be looking for, I'll look at some queries as if I were doing for musical instruments. But again, it won't be quite the same thing. So let me go ahead and do a use musical instruments. Oh, that's right. I can't double click that. I can always forget. I can only do that with table and column names. Now, let me clear this thing first. Clear. Okay, so now I'm using this. And so, as we know, Chapter 5 was about CRUD operations. So there's going to be some stuff that I want you to know about that, about inserting values into a table, about deleting rows from a table, about updating a table row to change the data in it. And then Chapter 6 was about summary queries, right? So as far as the CRUD operations go, they are going to be delete, insert into. I guess if I'm doing the full clause there, I better do this: delete from, insert into, and update. Those are going to be the 3 things that I'm looking for you to be able to do for Chapter 5. So starting with delete first. Let's say I do something like, well, let's just go ahead and select everything from classical orchestra to start with, just to remind ourselves what it's got in there. From classical orchestra, I'll probably use Baroque orchestra instead for the final, just to make it different, just to mix things up on you, Okay, so we've got ID, we've got the instrument, which is a string, varchar, and then timbre ID, which is, remember what I was saying, right? Timbre ID, you might want to look in musical timbres and notice that there's an ID column and think, those guys are probably connected to each other. It's just like common, the way that tables tend to be named, or columns in this case tend to be named. Okay, so if I want to delete from classical orchestra, I don't know, I'll just grab the last one here. I'm just going to delete timpani, right? So, know how to do this. Delete from, and classical orchestra. And when you do the where clause to tell it which row you want it to delete, you have to reference an index column. You probably don't have to look this up. You can probably be pretty sure that something like this is going to be the primary key, right? So that would be my guess. I would probably guess that before looking it up. I would probably just say where ID equals 12. And I got green, but as you guys know, I like to go back over here and double check. I do that, select everything from, and look and see that number 12 is gone. Yes, indeed. Okay, so that's just a simple delete, right? It's easy as it gets. Let's do, and by the way, yeah, do keep in mind the only thing possible gotcha there is that you do have to reference a key column here. So if you try to do like where instrument equals, trumpet, or I guess we deleted timpani, but still, if you try doing something like this, chances are it's not going to work because it needs to be an index column. Okay, so we did the delete from. Let's do an insert into classical orchestra as long as we're here. Something like values. Well, let's put this one right back in there. So we'll go ahead and do default for the auto incrementer. You know what? I've seen the way that default discussion went. I think I'm more likely to actually just give you a specific thing to put in. So we just got rid of number 12. Let's go ahead and put number 12 right back in there. And why not? We'll go ahead and do the same thing. It probably won't be the same thing, but it should be clear. And then the timbre ID on timpani is going to be 4. So there's a basics insert into. If I go back and do my select from, then we should see that that's right back where it was. Notice if I had said default here, instead of putting 12, it wouldn't have gone back on number 12 because it never reuses the same number in an auto incrementer that existed there once upon a time at any stage. It keeps track of that data. So if I had put in default here, then it would have put in, put it into 13 instead of 12. Okay, so there is a simple insert statement. And let's do an update. So let's say I decided I've got the wrong timbre ID here and I need to put it, it's not, it's the right one. But let's say we need to update that. Or let's see, horn. Let's change horn to horns. Normally that's the way it's said. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to do update the table name, which is, again, classical orchestra. And you have to remember to do the set keyword here, and we're going to be setting the name, the instrument name here, which is just called instrument, equals, and then the new value that we want, which is horns. And then we use the where clause to tell it which row we're updating, where ID equals 10, like that. So when I run this, assuming I get green, then where this was, instead of saying horn, it'll say horns. I got green. Let's go up here and do our select and take a look. And yes, horn changed to horns. There we go. So we've done a simple delete, we've done a simple insert into, and we've done a simple update. And that's the stuff I want you to know how to code from scratch as far as Chapter 5 goes. See, it's nothing really extensive. I'm not going to do any really complex queries or anything. Summary queries. Let's see, what do we want to do here? Well, we want to do an aggregate function. The aggregate functions that I'm likely to ask for count and sum are the two big ones. You can almost be certain that one or the other, or maybe both of them, will be on there. It wouldn't be completely out of order to also study average. I probably will not ask you for the other two that we went over, which are min and max, minimum and maximum values. They don't seem relevant to these tables. That's all. There's nothing wrong with those. Otherwise, I might ask those instead. But count and sum are your most likely bets for what's going to be on the test. It's going to be one of those two or maybe both. So let's say I want, okay, we just did a select all. So let's see, timbre ID. So, okay, I got it. So notice that there are several instruments that share the same timbre ID, which, by the way, well, you'll see. I'm going to name this something else, as I said. But like that, yeah, everything from first violin down to double bass, they all go into timbre ID of 1, which is strings. And then there's several that go with woodwinds, and then like a couple in brass, and then one in percussion. So let's say I want to know how many instrument groups, or parts, as they call it, are in each timbre ID. So I would expect to get back for timbre ID 1, let's see, it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of those. And for woodwinds, I expect to get back 4 of those, right? Flute, oboe, clarinet, and bassoon. I'll expect to get back 2 for the horns, and then 1 for the 4, which is percussion. So let's go ahead and try that. So once again, it's going to be a select, and let's go ahead and do timbre ID, and we need a summary query here, and this is about as simple as it gets. It's going to be a count, and I'm going to ask it to count all. Basically, I'm trying to count all that exists within a certain group, and the way I'm going to split these into groups is that I'm going to use, well, group by, right? That's the way you get that done. So let's go ahead and do our old friend from classical orchestra. You do a lot of copying and pasting here. And if I do a group by timbre ID, then it should group these together. So everything with a timbre ID of 1 will be in one group, and it'll count how many there are, how many rows are being returned in each of those groups. So that's what I'm expecting. In the first column here, I'm expecting to see 1, 2, 3, 4 right down, and that's going to tell me how many of those in each group. So here we go, 1, 2, 3, 4. 1 is the strings, and there are 5 of those, like we expected. Second one is woodwinds. There were 4, just like we expected. There are 2 in the brass, and there's 1 in the percussion. So this is an example of a very simple summary query that I will almost certainly ask you something very close to this. Now, I will probably also ask you to do something like this, a summary query that involves joining 2 tables together. There was a join even on the midterm exam, so this is old hat to you guys. But say I want to do the same thing as this, except I want to make 2 modifications to it. Instead of timbre ID, these numbers that wouldn't make much sense to a conductor, I want to go into musical timbres and get the actual timbres here. Let's take a look at what this guy looks like. So I'm going to do this query here. Musical timbres lines up these numbers, the 1, 2, 3, 4 that we've seen, but with the actual English name of each of these, like strings, woodwinds, brass, percussion, right? That's what a conductor would be more interested in. 1, 2, 3, 4 doesn't make any sense to them. So to do that, we need to join 2 tables together and do the summary query as we did here. And then instead of grabbing timbre ID, it'll be timbre, and then we'll throw in a column alias as well, and maybe sort these, that sort of thing. Basically just doing the same kind of thing, but a more complex query. So it'll start out the same way, almost. We'll do a select statement. And then instead of timbre ID, we're going to do timbre, which is the column from the musical timbres table, the other table, right? And then we will do a count all, like before. This time we'll add an alias to it. and number of parts. So that's what it's doing here. It's counting the number of parts per instrument type, basically. And these 5 would be first violin, second violins, violas, cellos, and bass. So that's what it is. That's number of parts. So we've added the alias in. We're going to do this from our old friend Classical Orchestra. Let's give it a table alias this time. And we'll do a join this time. We have to join this with, what is it? Musical timbres, right? I definitely have a better name for this in the final exam. And we'll call that T for timbres. You have to give it an on condition. And once again, you can compare the columns here. Now, a few people made the understandable mistake in the midterm of saying, okay, well, I'm going to say, this ID equals this ID. But remember to look for the foreign key naming convention. So if you see something like timbre ID and another table that's called timbres or something like that, then that's probably the one that's actually the duplicate here. It's probably the ID of timbres and then timbre ID in the other table. That's the common naming convention on these. So on C.timbre ID equals T, the other table, .id. And we have to do our group by here in order to make everything work, just like before. This time, instead of grouping by timbre ID, we're grouping by timbre, like this. And so we should get the same result here, except that it might be in a form that a non-programming conductor might find a little bit more easy to read through and figure out what the heck we're talking about, right? It's not just a bunch of numbers. Now it seems a little more clear. Not only do we have English names for the timbres, but we also have a column name over here with the alias that makes a little bit more sense too, right? As opposed to, what was it called before? That, yeah, like count asterisk, yeah. Non-programmer is not going to have any clue what that's supposed to mean. This makes more sense to them, right? So might do something like, I don't think, I'm not going to do having. I will ask about having on the multiple choice, but I'm not going to put it on the lab portion of the test. I may just, just to make it slightly more complex, do like another order by, sorting this by, I don't know, in this case, maybe, I don't know why we would want these in reverse alphabetical order, but maybe, you never know. So something like this. This will be, let's see if I can just reduce this down so you can see the whole thing. Sometimes the easiest thing to do to get rid of the result grid is just to do, actually, no, that would throw an error. That gets rid of the result grid. So it'll probably be something, like I said, pretty close to this, and it'll probably be something like this relationship between the two. Notice that this one is a simpler version of this one, right? This one is taking this query and then taking it further by adding to it and setting other conditions on it and so on. It's likely that I'll do something like that as well. It won't be exactly this, but it'll be something pretty close. Okay, and that's it. That's for the lab portion of the exam. This is the stuff I'll be looking for, more or less, something pretty close to this. Any questions about that or about the multiple choice questions? Okay, so I'm now planning on 10 points per each. Even Steven? So study correspondingly. There will be more points based on what can you code according to instructions than there was in the midterm exam. Midterm exam, 6 points out of 20. This time it's probably going to be 10 points out of 20. Maybe 8, but at this point it's looking like 10. Okay, I will stop the recording.